I guess the next topic to talk about really is when we first started playing around with this, we had some, as a lot of you have had, we had some pretty amazing experiences and definitely noticed some changes in our emotional health and spiritual growth and that sort of thing. And then after 4 or 5 months, when we sat down and put the headphones on and pushed the play button, it just didn't feel the same anymore. It just didn't have the same pizzazz. It didn't have the same oomph that it had before. And we thought, well, it's just, one of those days. And the next day, same thing. And the next day after that, same thing. And let me tell you, we were somewhat despondent because we thought we had found it. Because, as many of you know, this can really create some euphoria, some bliss when you do it. And to have that stop happening, we thought, oh, this is really a drag. So we wondered, is there a way that we can take this further than just the few months that it had taken us so far? Now, at this particular time, the prevailing view of this type of technology was that what was important was to get yourself into a certain brainwave pattern. As I said yesterday, something just kind of intuitively told me there had to be more to it than that. It seemed like alpha did something to you, but theta did more, and delta did even more than that. And that the slower the brainwave pattern, that the more powerful it was. And that was the way everyone was thinking about it. The other thing that was a prevailing view was that because everybody was so focused on what brainwave pattern you were in, they kind of didn't notice another aspect of the technology that I eventually noticed. And to explain this, I have to give you sort of at least the short version of how the technology works. What Oster was describing in his article in Scientific American was that if you put a tone of a certain frequency in one ear and then a tone of another frequency that was slightly different in the other ear, that the brain essentially would resonate to the difference between those two tones. So that if the tone in one ear was 400 cycles per second and the tone in the other ear was 410 cycles per second, just to use that as an example, then the difference is 10 cycles per second. And the brain would then resonate to 10 cycles per second, which is in the middle of the alpha range, which is 8 to 12 cycles per second. Now, if you stop to think about it, there are actually then an infinite number of pairs of tones that could be used to generate this 10 cycle per second in the brain. You could use 200 and 210, or 197 and 207, or 36 and 46, or anything, as long as the difference was 10. Well, the prevailing wisdom, which was mostly centered around the Monroe Institute, who were the main people that were doing anything with this type of technology in those days, the prevailing thought was that, it doesn't matter which tones you use, because the only thing that matters is the difference. Because what really matters is what brainwave pattern you're in. Somehow, this did not seem intuitively obvious to me that they were right. And so I began to play around with this a little bit and tried some other carrier frequencies. Tried some, the lower of the two tones is what people call the carrier frequency, or it's what I call the carrier frequency. So if you had 400 cycles per second and 410 cycles per second, the carrier frequency of that pair of tones would be 400 cycles per second. Now there's a little more to this than that. I'm giving a bit of a simplified explanation just because there's no point in bringing in the other variables, but this is really the basics of it. So at first I thought that if you tried 500 cycles per second, that would probably be more powerful, and 600 would be even more powerful. But it turned out to be the opposite. It turned out to be that as you made the carrier frequency lower, it was more powerful. And this actually makes sense in terms of physics. If you, for instance, look at things in the natural world, such as ocean waves, for instance, coming in. I mean, look at another naturally occurring waveform. When the ocean waves are rolling in, the ones that are of high frequency are the little ones, right? They come in much more often, and they're not very powerful. Whereas the ones that come in at low frequency are the big ones, and they really have a lot of power. And it turns out that waves of lower frequency are more powerful. The lower the frequency, the more power the waveform carries. And this turned out to be the case. And remember I said yesterday that what I believed was happening here was not so much that you're putting someone in an alpha brainwave pattern and this was happening, or a theta brainwave pattern and something else was happening, and a delta brainwave pattern and something else was happening. That was part of it, but what was really happening was that we were creating these very large electrical fluctuations in the brain, and the brain couldn't handle it the way that it was structured. So the brain had to reorganize itself and create a new structure that could handle it, and that was where the change happened for people, was in going through that process. So what turns out to be the case is that if you are stimulated for a number of months every day by the frequencies that are on awakening prologue, at a certain point your brain has made all the changes it needs to make in order to handle that stimulus, that input. And at that point, when you listen to awakening prologue, it doesn't really push you anymore. And though, as I've said, the subjective experience is really not very reliable and certainly not very important, there does come a point where you say, you know, I can tell, this just is not pushing me the way that it was before. And it's very much like if you're running a mile every day, and at first it's really hard, but after you've been doing it for a couple of months, your body has reorganized itself, created the cardiovascular structure that it needs to easily run a mile, and then it's not that running a mile isn't good for you anymore, but it doesn't really push you into any better shape. It just kind of maintains you where you are. And then if you want to get in better shape, then you'd say, okay, I'm going to make it 2 miles or whatever. So the same thing happens with this technology. You use awakening prologue for a while, and at a certain point, the brain has created all the new neural pathways, all the new structure that it needs in order to easily handle that stimulus, and then it just doesn't seem to affect you the same way. Then, if you go on to the next level, to awakening level 1, we lower the carrier frequency a bit, and suddenly when you listen to it, it feels strong again. And then the brain goes through another phase of reorganizing itself in response to that, until finally, for most people, about 6 months later, the brain finishes creating whatever structure it needs to handle that. And then if you say, wow, this is great, and I still want more, then you can go on to awakening level 2, where the carrier frequency is lowered again. And so with every level of the program, we just keep lowering that carrier frequency. And then, as you know, starting in the first custom level, we add those deeper immersion soundtracks that take you progressively deeper into delta. So you could liken this to running, where the brainwave pattern you're in is kind of like how far you run, and the carrier frequency, wait a minute, am I saying this wrong? The brainwave pattern you're in, which we call the beat frequency, is kind of like how fast you run, and the carrier frequency is like how far you run. So you start off running a mile, and you get so that you can run it faster and faster until you're running a mile as, pretty much as fast as you can. Then you go to 2 miles, but you slow down a little bit because it's farther, and then you gradually build up so you're running 2 miles as fast as you can.